This one is going to feel counterintuitive, possibly uncomfortable, maybe even a little offensive if you have spent any significant amount of time trying to be the easiest, most accommodating, least disappointing version of yourself around someone who runs from closeness. Because everything you were doing, the softening, the adjusting, the careful management of how much of yourself you showed at any given time, felt like love. It felt like patience. It felt like the reasonable thing to do with someone whose emotional walls were visible from the very beginning. But here is what it actually was. It was you auditioning, continuously, for a role in someone's life that should have simply been yours. Avoidants have a fantasy about the perfect partner. Not a conscious, articulated fantasy, a deep, psychological one that operates mostly beneath awareness. And at the center of that fantasy is someone who requires nothing, someone whose needs are minimal, whose reactions are always measured, whose presence adds warmth without ever adding weight. Someone who enriches the avoidance life without ever complicating it. And when you first meet an avoidant, especially one you are genuinely drawn to, there is a natural tendency to approximate that fantasy as closely as possible. Not because you are dishonest, because you are trying, because you want this to work, because the version of yourself that is easy and uncomplicated and effortlessly cool feels like your best foot forward. The problem is that foot is attached to a person, a full, complicated, needing, feeling, sometimes inconvenient person. And the longer you hide that person, the more the avoidant falls in love with an idea rather than a human being. Here is what happens when you disappoint an avoidant. Not devastate, not betray, not blow up the relationship with something catastrophic. Simply disappoint. You have a bad day and you are not warm. You ask for something and you do not soften the ask. You disagree and you do not immediately make it comfortable for them. You show up as a full person with edges and needs and reactions that are not carefully curated for their emotional comfort. Their first response is usually internal friction, a low-level irritation or discomfort that the avoidant might not even be able to name. Because the fantasy just developed a crack, and cracks in the fantasy feel threatening before they feel clarifying. But here is what happens next, and this is the part nobody tells you. The avoidant recalibrates, not always visibly, not always immediately, but something shifts in how they are relating to you. Because you just introduced them to a version of yourself that is real. And real people, people with actual texture and weight and humanity, are the only people the avoidance attachment system knows how to genuinely bond with. The fantasy version of you was always going to be discarded eventually. Fantasies are not something you attach to. They are something you consume and move past. But a real person, a person who disappoints sometimes and still holds their ground, a person who needs things and does not apologize for needing them, that person is something the avoidant psyche has to actually reckon with. There is a specific dynamic that develops when you are too consistently pleasing around an avoidant. They get comfortable, and comfort for an avoidant is not the same thing as connection. Comfort is the feeling of low emotional stakes. It is the absence of genuine engagement. When you are endlessly accommodating, endlessly easy, endlessly available in exactly the way they need you to be, the avoidant stops being activated by you. Not because they do not like you, because there is nothing to push against. Avoidants, despite everything their behaviour suggests, are not actually seeking a frictionless relationship. What they are seeking is a safe relationship. And safety, real safety, does not come from the absence of friction. It comes from friction that gets navigated without catastrophe, from disappointment that does not end in abandonment, from conflict that resolves into repair. When you never disappoint, you never give the relationship the opportunity to demonstrate that it can survive disappointment. And an avoidant who has no evidence that the relationship can survive difficulty has no deep reason to believe it is actually safe. It just feels good right now. And things that just feel good right now are easy to walk away from when the feeling fades. Your needs are not the problem. Your realness is not the problem. The version of yourself you have been suppressing to stay palatable to someone who is afraid of intimacy, that is actually the version of yourself that could create something genuine. Because here is what disappointing and avoidant actually communicates at a psychological level. It communicates permanence. It says, I am a person who exists independently of your comfort. I was here before your approval, and I will be here regardless of whether I have it right now. My sense of self does not hinge on your reaction to me. That is not threatening to a healthy person. That is attractive. And to an avoidant who is doing any level of genuine internal work, it is the specific quality that separates a real relationship from a comfortable illusion. Stop managing their experience of you. Stop editing out the parts of yourself that might create friction. Stop swallowing the ask because the timing does not feel right. Stop being so endlessly reasonable that you have become, effectively, invisible as an actual human being with an actual interior life. Show up fully, need things, disagree, have a bad day without performing recovery. Let them see the version of you that exists when you are not performing for anyone. Not to test them, not as a strategy, but because you deserve to be in a relationship where your full self is the thing someone is choosing. And if disappointing them occasionally is what ends it, then what ended was never built on anything real. It was built on a version of you that was never going to be sustainable. And you deserve better than a relationship that requires you to disappear inside it.